Have you ever sat across from someone you care about feeling the weight of their presence and yet sensed nothing at all? The room is full, but your heart feels hollow. Their words float past you, light as air, but heavy with absence. You are there, and yet you are invisible. This is the quiet void between two hearts, the space where connection exists on the surface, but intimacy never arrives, the unread. Messages think of the messages left on read, the calls unanswered, the "I'll reply later" that never comes. Every ping, every notification used to carry hope, every hello used to promise acknowledgement. And now the silence is deafening. It is in those small, seemingly trivial omissions that we feel the deepest ache. It is in the empty corners of digital conversations that loneliness blooms. You are left staring at your phone, wondering what went wrong, why your presence does not elicit a response. Your mind spins through every interaction, every misstep, imagining errors you did not commit. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not them, but your own fears, your own longing. The weight of absence in present. Even when someone is physically present, their absence can still echo louder than any distance. You may sit beside them at a cafe, share a movie, or attend a gathering together, and yet feel the space between your hearts stretching, taut and unbridgeable. It is the subtle cues, the eyes that wander, the distracted smiles, the tone that carries no warmth that speak louder than any words. Presence without attention is a kind of loneliness that pierces deeper than being ignored entirely. It leaves you questioning your worth, wondering if your love, your effort, your very being matters at all. The invisible weight, this void is heavy, and the weight is carried silently. You may smile, laugh, or nod, hiding the ache beneath the surface. To others, everything appears normal. But inside your heart strains under the quiet knowledge that your presence does not reach them, that your care is unreceived, and that intimacy, the true, soul-deep connection you long for, remains just beyond your grasp. The quiet void is relentless because it is subtle. Unlike overt rejection, it doesn't shout. It whispers. It seeps into the spaces of your thoughts, coloring your memories, your hopes, and your expectations with a soft but persistent ache. The heart that hopes, and yet your heart continues to hope. You hope for a smile that lingers, a word that matters, a look that says, "I see you." You hope that your effort, your vulnerability, your love will finally cross the gap, will finally land where it was intended, and will finally be recognized. But hope in the absence of reciprocity becomes a double-edged sword. It nurtures longing while simultaneously sharpening the ache. It reminds you what could have been while showing you what is. Metaphor. The room between hearts. Picture two rooms separated by a thin wall. You can hear muffled voices, laughter, maybe even the sound of movement, but no door exists between you. You reach, you knock, you speak through the barrier, hoping it will somehow dissolve. But the wall remains. You cannot see their expression fully. You cannot feel their warmth. You can only imagine what lies on the other side. This is the quiet void between two hearts. The closeness without the intimacy, the togetherness without the belonging. It is a liminal space, neither fully together nor fully apart. It is the space where longing resides, unacknowledged and unfulfilled. The subtle erosion. The tragedy of this void is not always dramatic. There is no single moment that shatters the connection. Instead, it is the accumulation of small absences, the quiet neglects, the missed glances. A laugh that doesn't reach your eyes, a conversation that feels perfunctory, a hand that brushes past yours without grasping. Each of these moments is tiny, almost imperceptible, but over time they accumulate, carving a hollow space inside your chest. And what is left is a quiet void, a space filled not with love, but with absence, not with understanding, but with questions. Not with intimacy, but with the echo of what might have been. Real-life resonance. Think of the parent who smiles at the table but doesn't hear your dreams. The friend who nods at your words but never responds to your heart. The partner who shares your bed but not your thoughts. Every human relationship carries this potential. It is not always deliberate. Sometimes it is oversight. Sometimes it is fear, distraction, or exhaustion. Sometimes it is a lack of awareness, not a lack of care. But the effect is the same. Your heart feels unseen. Your presence feels unvalued. And in the quiet spaces between connection and intimacy, you are left with a subtle, gnawing loneliness. The mind's quiet spiral. When we inhabit this void, our minds often spiral. We question ourselves.
Was it something I did? Something I said?
Something I failed to say? We overanalyze past interactions, imagine scenarios that never occurred, and wrestle with invisible judgments. The heart longs for proof of worth. The mind searches for explanation, and both are denied in the emptiness. This inner dialogue, quiet and persistent, becomes a storm. And even in a crowded room, even among laughter, the mind can feel isolated, adrift, and exhausted, a seed of understanding. And yet, even in this aching, there is a seed of awareness. You begin to recognize the quiet void for what it is, not always a reflection of your inadequacy, but often a reflection of misalignment, distraction, or the limits of the other person's capacity. This subtle recognition does not erase the pain, but it reframes it. It plants the first seed of clarity in a field overgrown with longing and self-doubt. You begin to see silence has its own meaning, absence carries a message, and your heart, though aching, is learning to interpret it. The emotional core. This is where the heart learns its first truth. Being unseen does not make you invisible. Being unheard does not make you unworthy. Even when others fail to notice, even when attention falters, even when intimacy remains elusive, your presence matters. Your effort matters. Your love matters. The quiet void is not the end. It is the space where understanding begins, where self-reflection begins, where the heart begins to discern the difference between neglect that diminishes and silence that teaches. The subtle hope. Though the void is haunting, it also invites you to lean inward, to tend to your own heart, to nurture your own sense of worth. Here, in this quiet, your heart begins to learn you can exist fully without constant validation. You can carry love without guarantee of return. You can honor your longing without losing yourself to it. And in that quiet recognition, the first gentle hope emerges.
A hope that the void is not empty, it is preparatory.
A hope that the spaces left by absence can one day be filled with true connection, clarity, and understanding. Closing arc, the quiet void between two hearts, is a delicate, painful, and tender space. It is where longing lingers, questions arise, and the ache of absence is felt most deeply. But this emptiness is not random. It has hidden roots, patterns, motives, and truths that lie beneath the surface. And in those roots there is the beginning of understanding, insight, and the possibility of healing. The silence has spoken, the heart has listened, and the journey is just beginning. We live in a world where connection is just a tap away.
A like, a comment, a fleeting notification. And suddenly we feel seen, but does it last?
Does it reach the depth of our longing? We scroll through carefully curated lives, smile at filtered snapshots, and react to stories that vanish in 24 hours. And yet, when the screen goes dark, the emptiness remains. This is the illusion of connection, a digital embrace that warms for a moment, but leaves the heart just as cold. The surface-level bond social media has revolutionized the way we interact. Every day, billions of messages are sent, hundreds of photos are shared, and countless friends appear in our feeds. But look closer. How many of these interactions actually touch the soul? How many truly acknowledge the person you are beneath the curated image? We celebrate milestones with emojis, express sorrow with a heart reaction, and share joy with a fleeting comment. Yet these gestures, though convenient, are often hollow. They create a veneer of intimacy that rarely satisfies the deep human need to be known, understood, and valued. The paradox of instant gratification. The speed of digital connection intensifies the illusion. Instant likes, instant messages, instant responses. Our brains are trained to expect immediate acknowledgement. When it arrives, we feel a momentary rush, validation, attention, presence, but it fades quickly. And when it doesn't arrive, the ache of invisibility returns,
magnified by the stark comparison to others' visible approval. The paradox is cruel. We are more connected than ever,
yet loneliness has become a silent epidemic. Screens give the impression of closeness but cannot replace authentic emotional exchange. Story of surface connection. Consider Sarah, a young woman who spent hours crafting her online persona. Her photos were perfect, her captions witty, her posts carefully timed to engage. She had hundreds of friends, thousands of followers, yet at night, when the phone lay silent, she felt empty. Messages went unanswered, events were forgotten, and despite the digital applause, the loneliness was palpable. The irony was sharp. The more connected she appeared, the more isolated she truly felt. The digital world had given her an audience, but not a heart that saw her. The comparison trap. Social media also fuels comparison. We witness lives polished to perfection and wonder why ours feels so messy, so incomplete, so unnoticed. A friend's vacation, a colleague's promotion, a stranger's happy relationship. Every scroll is a mirror reflecting perceived deficiencies. The mind begins to whisper, why am I not enough? Why am I left behind? This quiet erosion chips away at self-worth, amplifying the invisible ache we first felt in the quiet void. The digital applause is fleeting. The internal loneliness is persistent. The curated self. We also cultivate a curated self, an online persona that is selectively shared, polished, and designed to attract approval. But the deeper truth is rarely revealed. The exhaustion behind the smile, the tears wiped away before posting, the nights spent yearning for understanding that never comes. Our curated selves are a survival mechanism, a way to be noticed without truly being seen. But every layer of performance distances us further from authentic intimacy, reinforcing the cycle of superficial connection. Metaphor. The digital masquerade. Imagine a grand ballroom filled with masked dancers. Everyone moves gracefully, smiles perfectly, and engages in lively conversation. But beneath the masks, no one truly knows who is behind the face. Connections are made with the mask, not the person. Touches are felt, but not remembered. Smiles are returned, but never understood. This is the digital age, a masquerade of connection where intimacy is hidden behind filters, status updates, and fleeting reactions. The heart longs for unmasked presence, but the screens deliver only surface-level engagement, cultural shift, and emotional cost. Historically, human connection relied on presence, eye contact, shared experiences, and vulnerability. Stories were told aloud, gestures carried meaning, listening required effort. Now cultural shifts favor speed, convenience, and broadcast over deep listening. Emotional labor is outsourced to apps and algorithms. We are told that connection is immediate, measurable, and visible, yet invisible in its essence. The emotional cost is profound. We learn to tolerate partial attention, minimal acknowledgement, and transient validation. We adapt to being seen in pixels rather than in person, in emojis rather than in understanding. And slowly, subtly, the void inside us grows. Story of fragmented intimacy. Jamal, a father and husband, noticed the effect most clearly in his own family. His children were often absorbed in devices, thumbs scrolling, eyes glazed. Dinner conversations were interrupted by notifications. Weekend outings competed with constant pings. He tried to engage, asked questions, suggested activities, shared stories, but the responses were fragmented, distracted. The connection felt like sand slipping through fingers, present, yet never whole. Jamal realized the danger. Superficiality can quietly hollow out relationships, leaving hearts present but unfulfilled, eyes looking but never truly seeing. The emotional consequences. Superficial connection is not harmless. It reshapes our emotional landscape. Anxiety, anticipating likes, messages, and attention creates constant internal tension. Insecurity. Comparing our behind the scenes to others' highlights fosters self-doubt. Loneliness. Despite constant contact, our hearts are deprived of meaningful engagement. Exhaustion. Curating ourselves for external validation drains energy and emotional reserves. These subtle pressures can accumulate into a pervasive emptiness, one that feels personal, as though the fault lies within us. Psychological perspective. Psychologists explain this as the paradox of social media. High connectivity, low intimacy. Humans crave genuine reciprocity. We need acknowledgement that is felt, empathy that is shared, and presence that is unbroken. Digital interaction often delivers the illusion but not the substance. The mind interprets attention as care, and the absence of attention as rejection, reinforcing cycles of self-doubt and longing. It is a silent, persistent strain on the psyche, one that mirrors the quiet void described in Section 1, but amplified by the constant visibility of others' perceived happiness. The role of reflection. Amid this superficiality, reflection becomes critical. We must ask, which connections nourish my soul? Which ones leave me empty? Where do I seek approval instead of authentic intimacy? The act of noticing, truly noticing the quality of our interactions, is the first step toward reclaiming emotional depth. Awareness illuminates patterns, revealing where the heart is feeding on shallow engagement and where it can seek substance. Story of awakening. Consider Elena, who spent years accumulating online connections, valuing likes over conversations, followers over friendships. She noticed the emptiness creeping in, joy that faded the moment her phone screen dimmed, validation that vanished as quickly as it appeared. One evening, she logged off intentionally, stepped outside, and simply listened to the wind, to birds, to the rhythm of her own breathing. In the quiet, she recognized a longing deeper than digital applause, the need to be genuinely seen,
Heard and valued. That night,
She began nurturing connections differently, not for visibility, but for presence. She called a friend without expectation of reciprocity, wrote a letter that would never be posted, and simply existed fully with those around her. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of depth, of intimacy, of connection that was real. Metaphor: the shallow pool versus the deep. Lake digital connection is like a shallow pool, sparkling, enticing, easy to dip into. You see your reflection, feel a splash of warmth, and imagine the water has depth. True intimacy is like a deep lake. The surface may be calm, but below lies substance, reflection, and enduring presence. One can swim endlessly in the pool, yet never feel the grounding depth that the lake provides. Social media teaches us to float on the surface. Reflection, patience, and intentionality teach us to dive deep. Closing. The illusion of connection is seductive. It promises closeness but often delivers absence. It creates noise without resonance, presence without intimacy, and visibility without acknowledgement. Yet even here, there is a lesson. The emptiness is not entirely external. Understanding the patterns, recognizing the superficiality, and noticing the gap allows the heart to orient itself toward depth, authenticity, and presence. The screens, the likes, the curated images, they are not the source of our fulfillment. True connection comes from intentionality, emotional availability, and the courage to seek presence in the real world. Have you ever felt a hollow ache in your chest that no amount of conversation, scrolling, or fleeting attention could fill? It's not hunger for food, not thirst for water. It's hunger for understanding, for presence, for genuine connection. It is emotional starvation, the quiet, gnawing need we often ignore.
Even from ourselves. This is the hunger that wakes at 2 a.m., the craving that whispers in empty rooms.
The silent ache no screen or superficial interaction can soothe. The unseen void. We live in a world that prizes efficiency, achievement and visibility over emotional nourishment. We learn early to suppress neediness, to hide our longing, to avoid being too much. Yet inside, the heart continues to hunger. It hungers for empathy when our pain is dismissed. It hungers for intimacy when relationships remain surface level. It hungers for acknowledgement when we feel invisible. We eat, we sleep, we work, we socialize, but the inner emptiness lingers. The body may be fed, but the heart goes hungry. Metaphor. The starving candle. Imagine a candle burning in a dark room. It gives light generously, illuminating the space for others, flickering with warmth and care. But no one feeds it. No one replenishes the wax.
No one shields it from drafts. Over time, the candle diminishes.
Its glow fades. It struggles to burn as brightly. And yet, it continues giving, often until there is almost nothing left. This is the silent truth of emotional starvation. We continue to give, hoping for nourishment in return, yet the hunger remains unmet. Story of inner hunger. Consider Amina, who spent years supporting friends, colleagues, and family emotionally. She was always the first to call, the first to listen, the first to offer advice or comfort. On the surface, she was surrounded by connection. Messages poured in, invitations arrived, and people seemed grateful. But inside, Amina felt a persistent emptiness. Her needs, her desire to be truly seen, to be vulnerable without fear, to be understood, were neglected. Her generosity was never mirrored. The emotional starvation she experienced was invisible to those around her. It's a hunger that often goes unnoticed because it hides behind smiles, effort, and outward composure. The fear of vulnerability. One reason emotional hunger persists is fear. We fear being too much. We fear rejection. We fear that showing our neediness will push people away rather than draw them near. So we mask the craving with humor, busyness, or self-reliance. We swallow our tears and tuck away our desires. We convince ourselves that we do not need to be nourished. But the hunger does not vanish. It simmers beneath the surface, coloring our moods, shaping our expectations, and quietly influencing every interaction. Subtle signs of starvation. Emotional starvation is not always dramatic. It manifests in subtle, often invisible ways. Overthinking every text or call, desperate for affirmation, craving attention but rejecting it out of fear or doubt, people-pleasing, sacrificing personal needs to feel enough, irritability or emotional fragility when needs are unmet, constant comparison to others' perceived fulfillment. These signs often feel personal, as if something is wrong with us. But they are natural consequences of unmet emotional needs, an echo of the inner hunger ignored too long. Metaphor. The empty cup. Your heart is like a cup. Every connection, every act of care is meant to pour into it. But if the cup is neglected, if the pour is one-sided, if no replenishment occurs, it eventually runs dry. A dry cup cannot nourish others fully, even when it tries. The overflow we give becomes strained, the sweetness fades, and our capacity to give and receive diminishes. Emotional starvation erodes not only our satisfaction but also our ability to connect meaningfully. The craving for authenticity at the core of this hunger is a craving for authenticity, a desire to be seen, accepted, and loved exactly as we are. We long for conversations where silence is comfortable, where vulnerability is safe, where laughter and tears are equally welcome. We long for someone to notice the unspoken struggle, to honor the invisible effort, to meet us without judgment or expectation. This craving is not indulgence, it is survival. Emotional nourishment is essential to the health of the heart, just as food is essential to the body. Story: the unmet. Need Ethan spent years in professional success, surrounded by colleagues, mentors, and clients who admired his skill. He received recognition, promotions, and accolades, yet he returned home to a quiet apartment, nights spent scrolling, seeking the human connection he craved. Calls went unanswered.
Old friends were distant.
The relationships he relied on for intimacy felt performative. Ethan realized that external success could never substitute for internal nourishment. His hunger was not for attention, it was for presence, understanding, and authentic reciprocity. The cycle of starvation, emotional hunger, often perpetuates itself. When our needs go unmet, we withdraw, fearing rejection or judgment. We become guarded, skeptical, or overly independent, but withdrawal only intensifies the void. It reduces opportunities for connection, further starving the heart. The more we fear vulnerability, the more isolated we become, and the deeper the hunger grows. It is a subtle trap. We crave intimacy, yet fear exposing our hunger. We long for nourishment, yet hesitate to ask for it. Psychological insight. Psychologists note that unmet emotional needs in adulthood often echo early life experiences, neglect, inconsistency, or conditional care. The adult heart remembers the hunger, even if the original source has faded. Every unacknowledged longing, every ignored feeling, every subtle rejection reinforces the pattern. This is why emotional starvation can feel relentless. It is not merely circumstance, it is a deeply embedded rhythm in our hearts, quietly shaping how we relate to ourselves and others. The courage to recognize hunger. The first step in addressing this hunger is recognition. You must name it. I am emotionally hungry. I have needs that matter. I deserve nourishment and presence. Acknowledgement is radical because society often teaches us to minimize our needs. We are told to be strong, independent, and unbothered. But the heart cannot thrive in denial. Recognizing the hunger does not mean blaming others. It means honoring your own experience, validating your own feelings, and beginning to seek the connections that feed the soul. Practical reflection. Identify the unmet needs. Write down what your heart craves. Attention, understanding, empathy, validation, intimacy. Notice patterns. Observe how you respond when your needs are ignored. Do you withdraw, overcompensate, or seek validation elsewhere? Practice gentle self-nourishment. Engage in activities that replenish your emotional reservoir. Journaling, meditative reflection, creative expression, or deep conversation with a trusted friend. Seek authentic connection. Focus on relationships where vulnerability is safe and reciprocated. Avoid surface-level validation that temporarily masks hunger. Metaphor: the starving tree. Imagine a tree that has been deprived of rain for months.
Its leaves are brittle, its branches weak.
Yet it continues to reach skyward, hoping for nourishment. When the first drops of rain arrive, the tree absorbs them slowly, gratefully, growing stronger day by day. Our hearts are like this tree. Emotional starvation weakens us, but recognition, care, and authentic connection provide the first drops of replenishment. Gradually, slowly, our strength and resilience return. Closing, reflection, emotional starvation is invisible yet profound. It is a quiet ache that colors every interaction, shapes every expectation, and haunts every moment of solitude. But hunger, when acknowledged, becomes a guide. It points to what your heart truly needs: presence, understanding, vulnerability, and authentic intimacy. Recognizing the hunger is not weakness, it is courage. It is the first step toward filling the void, tending the heart, and reclaiming the capacity to connect deeply. Have you ever wondered why, despite your deepest efforts, connection feels just out of reach? You give, you reach, you show vulnerability, and yet the response is often disappointment, withdrawal, or silence. The frustration is palpable. But the real question is, why does this pattern repeat? Why do the same relational gaps and silences appear again and again like echoes in a hollow chamber of the heart? The answer lies not just in others, but within the subtle, often unseen architecture of the mind. The invisible architecture of attachment-human connection is shaped early, through the bonds we form in childhood. Psychologists call this attachment the invisible wiring that teaches us how to trust, seek comfort, and give love. Secure attachment creates a rhythm of safety. We trust that our needs will be met, that we are worthy of attention. That intimacy is not a risk, but a source of growth. But when attachment is disrupted through inconsistency, neglect, or early rejection, the mind learns patterns that persist long into adulthood. Fear of abandonment, oversensitivity to silence, and the compulsion to anticipate rejection before it happens. The cycle of anticipated rejection, consider the scenario. You send a text or share a feeling, and the reply is delayed. Immediately, your mind begins to spin. Did I say something wrong? Am I too much? Do they even care? This isn't just a reaction to the moment. It is a replay of early experiences where attention and affection were unreliable. Your nervous system remembers unpredictability, translating it into chronic vigilance. You become hyper-aware, anxious, and reactive. A delayed reply is no longer a small absence. It is a signal of threat. Emotional starvation from Section 3 converges with attachment anxiety, amplifying the internal void. Story: the repeating echo take. David, who has struggled to maintain friendships for decades, every time a friend cancels plans, he spirals into doubt. Every unanswered message triggers intense worry. David's adult relationships mirror patterns from childhood: inconsistent attention from caregivers, unspoken criticism, and subtle emotional withdrawal. Without conscious awareness, he unconsciously recreates these dynamics, even with people who are safe and caring. The result? Cycles of disappointment, self-blame, and withdrawal. Even love becomes a minefield of anticipation, where the heart is always bracing for absence. Metaphor: the echoing hallway. Imagine walking through a long, narrow hallway with walls that absorb sound.
Every step, every word, every gesture echoes back to you, distorted and amplified. Your mind is that hallway.
Early experiences reverberate endlessly, shaping how every interaction feels. A friend's delay, a partner's distraction, a colleague's oversight, all echo the old, familiar tones of neglect and inconsistency. And over time, the echoes grow louder than reality. The present moment is colored by the past, making absence feel catastrophic and intimacy feel fragile. Fear of vulnerability. Attachment patterns foster another subtle but destructive force: fear of vulnerability. You want connection, yet the anticipation of rejection or disappointment makes exposing your heart feel dangerous. You soften your words, hide your true feelings, and construct emotional armor to protect yourself. But armor isolates. It keeps you safe from harm, yes, but it also keeps you from being truly seen. You long to be intimate, yet your defense mechanisms prevent the intimacy you crave. This is the paradox. The very patterns meant to protect you from pain can also perpetuate it, hollowing out your relational capacity. The cycle of self-sabotage, emotional starvation, and attachment anxiety combine into subtle sabotage. You test others' loyalty by withdrawing. You push for validation, then retreat when it doesn't arrive. You anticipate betrayal and unconsciously act in ways that confirm your fears. Each interaction is filtered through the lens of previous wounds. You are not intentionally destructive, but patterns operate beneath awareness, guiding behavior in ways that undermine the very intimacy you desire. Story, repetition, in love. Sophia entered relationships with hope and openness. She sought partners who seemed emotionally available, yet every romance followed a familiar trajectory. Initial closeness, subtle withdrawal, unspoken tension, and eventual heartbreak. Each time she blamed herself. She wondered, why can't I be enough? Why does it always fade? What Sophia didn't see was the invisible script she carried: anxious attachment, fear of abandonment, and expectation of inconsistency. Her patterns invited partners to respond predictably, recreating the relational dynamics she unconsciously anticipated. The spiral of emotional hunger. When emotional hunger, Section 3, collides with these psychological patterns, the spiral deepens. Hunger for attention fuels hyper-awareness. Hyper-awareness triggers fear and overcompensation. Overcompensation creates subtle pressure, leading to withdrawal or rejection by others. Withdrawal and rejection reinforce the original hunger, and the cycle begins anew. This loop operates quietly, often beneath conscious awareness. It hollows the heart, leaving you exhausted, wary, and longing simultaneously. The role of self-perception patterns are magnified by self-perception. When you view yourself as too sensitive, too needy, or unworthy, the mind interprets silence and absence as confirmation of inadequacy. You may attempt to overperform, overgive, or overadapt, seeking proof of worth externally, yet the internal void persists. The heart, conditioned by past wounds, cannot be fully satisfied by others until it recognizes its own value. Metaphor: the leaky vessel. Imagine a vessel meant to hold water. If it has cracks, no matter how much water you pour in, it will leak. The effort feels endless, the vessel never full. Attachment wounds and internalized doubt are the cracks. External validation, friendship, love, attention may temporarily fill the vessel, but without repairing the structure, the fullness is fleeting. Understanding the cracks is the first step to healing. Only by acknowledging the underlying patterns can the heart hold nourishment consistently. Subtle psychological traps. Several traps emerge from these patterns. Projection: seeing in others the neglect or criticism you fear in yourself. Hypervigilance: monitoring every interaction for signs of threat or rejection. People-pleasing: sacrificing your needs to prevent perceived abandonment. Avoidance: withdrawing from intimacy to protect against anticipated pain. These strategies once served survival purposes in childhood but become maladaptive in adult relationships, hollowing out your experience of connection. Story. Workplace. Dynamics. Take Marcus, a talented employee who excelled professionally but struggled socially. Colleagues would occasionally ignore him or include him in conversations superficially. Marcus's attachment patterns amplified the pain. A missed greeting became a statement of his inadequacy. A casual joke was interpreted as exclusion. Over time, he began avoiding social interactions, isolating himself, and deepening the very emptiness he feared. Even outside personal relationships, these psychological patterns distort experience, making connection tenuous across all areas of life. The invisible nature of the hollowing what makes these patterns so insidious is their invisibility. Others
May not notice your hypervigilance or withdrawal. You
may not realize your projections distort perception. You may not connect the dots between childhood experiences and adult relational outcomes. Yet the consequences are tangible. Emotional exhaustion, relational strain, chronic loneliness, and diminished capacity for intimacy. Toward awareness and validation, the first step to reclaiming connection is awareness. Recognizing the psychological patterns allows you to observe rather than be governed by them. Validation is also crucial. Understanding that these patterns are understandable, adaptive responses to early experiences reduces shame. The heart does not fail because it is flawed. It reacts because it has learned survival strategies that may no longer serve it. Metaphor. The garden of the mind. Imagine your mind as a garden. Some seeds were planted in fertile soil, love, trust, resilience. Others were sown in harsher conditions, fear, neglect, inconsistency. Without attention, weeds of pattern and old wounds take root, growing silently and crowding out the nourishing plants. The garden appears healthy from a distance, but the undergrowth hollows the soil, weakening the roots. Awareness, reflection, and intentional practice are the sunlight and water needed to reclaim the soil and allow the garden to flourish. Story. Turning awareness into action. Claire, after years of repeated disappointments in friendships and romantic relationships, began therapy. She learned about attachment patterns and recognized her anticipatory fear of rejection. For the first time, she could pause before reacting, reflect before withdrawing, and communicate her needs clearly. She realized that patterns she once considered personal flaws were predictable responses shaped by experience. This awareness did not erase difficulty, but it transformed it. By seeing the mechanics of her relational life, she began to step out of the cycle of self-sabotage, reclaiming both her dignity and her capacity for authentic connection. Closing. Reflection. Psychological patterns hollow us out not because we are unworthy, but because the mind adapts to survive. Attachment wounds, anticipatory rejection, fear of vulnerability, and cycles of disappointment are not failures, they are echoes of adaptation. But unchecked, they erode intimacy, amplify loneliness, and hollow the heart in ways subtle and profound. The good news is that recognition is the gateway to healing. Awareness allows you to step out of automatic responses, interrupt cycles, and cultivate connection that nourishes rather than depletes. In the age of constant communication, it is possible to sit across from someone, feel their hand in yours,
and still be profoundly alone, the heart knows.
You can be in a room filled with people, in a relationship that looks perfect to outsiders, and yet sense a hollow space between yourself and the one you love most. These are the stories of modern love, where proximity does not equal presence, and connection is often a promise unfulfilled. Portrait 1. Together but apart meet Liam and Hannah. They've been together for 5 years. To anyone looking from the outside, their life is enviable. Dinners at candlelit restaurants, shared travel photos, and social media posts radiating happiness. Yet in the quiet of their apartment, the air is thin with absence. Liam scrolls through his phone at the dinner table, barely noticing Hannah's anecdotes. Hannah laughs, but the sound is half-hearted, a melody for no one in particular. They speak, but only in fragments. Conversations are schedules, logistics, brief exchanges of necessity. Emotional intimacy has dissolved into convenience. And though both crave closeness, fear and habit have built walls neither dares dismantle. They live together, but their hearts reside in separate rooms, echoing emptiness back and forth like a haunting refrain. Portrait 2. Friendship as transaction. Consider Mia and Rachel. Friends since childhood, their bond was once effortless, full of shared secrets, laughter, and late-night confidences. Now interactions feel transactional. Mia calls Rachel, but only when she needs advice. Rachel texts, but responses are brief, obligatory. Even when they meet, conversations skim the surface, dancing around authentic emotion. Vulnerability feels risky, and both women silently guard their hearts. The warmth of old friendship remains as memory, but in the present, it is replaced by convenience and mutual utility. Connection exists, but it is hollow, leaving both craving the intimacy that once defined them. Metaphor, the window that doesn't. Open modern relationships often resemble a window that cannot open. We can see one another clearly, we can glimpse the beauty behind the glass, yet the barrier remains. Voices are heard, but muffled.
Touch is felt but distant.
Presence is apparent, but emotional air does not flow. The longing for intimacy intensifies with visibility. The closer we appear, the deeper the sense of emptiness when the heart cannot reach what the eyes can. Portrait 3. Love in expectation. Then there is Jordan and Elise, a couple who measure love by expectation rather than experience. They love each other, but mostly as an idea, a projection of how love should feel rather than how it actually does. Elise waits for Jordan to express emotion in the ways she believes are meaningful. Jordan waits for Elise to validate him through gestures he interprets as care. Neither communicates needs directly. Both assume the other should just know. Misunderstandings accumulate. Resentment grows silently, and the emotional distance widens. Their love is real, but it exists more in anticipation, in hope, in imagined fulfillment, than in the tangible present. The modern loneliness within togetherness. These stories reveal a subtle but painful truth. Physical presence does not guarantee emotional presence. The patterns we explored in Section 4, fear of vulnerability, attachment wounds, cycles of expectation and disappointment, often infiltrate the spaces closest to our heart. We sit next to someone we adore, yet the emotional absence is palpable. We send messages, yet they return cold or delayed. We share moments, yet they are hollow echoes, lacking the depth that true intimacy provides. Loneliness is no longer just a matter of being alone. It is a state that can exist amidst company, amid love, amid everything that superficially promises connection. Story. The silent bedroom. Elena and Mark have shared a home for years. Their life is orderly, predictable, and socially enviable. Yet when the lights dim and the world retreats, the silence is deafening. They lie side by side, scrolling on their devices, exchanging occasional words that barely bridge the gulf between them.
No one is at fault, both are weary, distracted,
and afraid of confronting the emptiness that has grown in tandem with routine. Sleep becomes both a refuge and a reminder. Even in the closest proximity, emotional absence remains. They are present physically, but profoundly absent in the ways that matter most. Metaphor. The house. With empty rooms, modern love can feel like a house filled with empty rooms. You walk the hallways, see familiar faces, touch familiar hands, yet each room echoes with absence. The spaces between floors, behind walls, and under ceilings are quiet voids where the heart longs for presence. And sometimes the emptiness is not just in the other person, it is also within us, shaped by years of unacknowledged hunger, fear, and pattern-driven withdrawal. Portrait 4. The friend who never shows up. Take Samira, who trusted her circle implicitly. Whenever she was in crisis, she expected someone to be there. Yet in moments that mattered, friends were absent. either distracted, overwhelmed, or simply unwilling to bear her emotional weight. The sting was sharp. Repeatedly, she began to internalize disappointment, questioning her own worth. Why did she deserve absence when she gave so freely? Why did her presence matter less than convenience? This story reflects a painful reality. Emptiness is often mirrored by those closest, highlighting the ways relational patterns hollow us from the inside out. Portrait 5. The parent and the child in family. Dynamics, emotional absence can feel just as profound. A child may grow up with parents who provide materially but not emotionally, who meet needs for food and shelter but leave the heart wanting. The result is a lifelong echo. Adult relationships carry the imprint of early absence. Unmet needs, fear of vulnerability, and subtle self-doubt accompany every interaction, shaping love and friendship alike. Emptiness, therefore, is generational, psychological, and relational, woven into patterns that often go unnoticed until we examine them closely. Metaphor: the echo chamber of the heart. Each of these stories forms an echo chamber in the mind. We experience absence repeatedly, internalize it, and replay it silently. The lover's distant gaze echoes the absent parent. The transactional friend mirrors the childhood need unmet. The romantic expectation mirrors the internalized patterns of fear and doubt. The echoes shape perception, making emptiness feel inevitable, even in relationships that could be fulfilling. The weight of invisible pain, emptiness in modern love, is not always loud or dramatic. It is subtle, missed nuances, unnoticed effort, words unspoken, small gestures unacknowledged. Yet its weight is profound. The mind records, the heart remembers, and the soul grows weary. Emotional starvation from Section 3 meets psychological patterns from Section 4, creating an invisible burden carried daily, quietly, and persistently. Story: the turning point. Within stories, even within these stories, there is a turning point. Liam and Hannah, despite years of quiet distance, noticed the ache one night while holding hands. They speak haltingly about what has gone unspoken. Amir reaches out to Rachel not for advice or utility, but for genuine presence, sharing her vulnerability without expectation. Jordan and Elise confront the gap between expectation and reality, learning that love requires conscious attention and communication, rather than hope that it will be understood automatically. Even in familial settings, parents and children can pause, recognize unmet needs, and begin the slow work of authentic presence. Reflection: emptiness as teacher. These portraits of modern love, while painful, serve as mirrors. They reflect our own patterns, cravings, and fears. They reveal where we hunger for intimacy, where we tolerate absence, and where we carry old wounds into the present. Emptiness, in this sense, is not merely a void, it is an invitation. It asks us to observe, to reflect, and to awaken. Where are we giving without receiving? Where are we present without being emotionally available? Where are our own patterns sabotaging connection? The answers illuminate the path forward. Metaphor: from emptiness to awakening, imagine a barren field under a grey sky. Nothing grows. The soil is dry and the wind carries only dust. But beneath the surface, seeds lie dormant, waiting for rain, for sunlight, for care. Emptiness is the soil. Awareness, reflection, and courage are the rain. What has been barren can bloom. The hollows of the heart are spaces ready to be filled, not with superficial connection, but with presence, authenticity, and attentive love. Closing: modern love is often complicated, distracted, and imperfect. But within its stories of emptiness lies the potential for awakening. Recognizing the hollows, naming the silent ache, and observing the patterns creates a doorway, a chance to shift from passive suffering to conscious presence. Connection, intimacy, and depth are possible. They begin with awareness, courage, and the willingness to step into vulnerability despite the risk. There comes a moment in every heart worn thin by absence, disappointment, and unmet longing when clarity pierces the fog. It may arrive quietly, like a pause between breaths, or suddenly like the first streak of dawn over a night that felt endless. You see patterns that were invisible before. The superficial connections, the habitual disappointments, the ways you gave endlessly yet received little in return. And in that clarity, a choice emerges. To continue drifting through emotional emptiness, or to reclaim your own worth and step toward authentic presence. This is the awakening, the pivot from despair to possibility, from longing to intentionality. Recognition of patterns. The first step in awakening is recognition. You begin to see the repeated cycles that have hollowed your heart. The friend who only calls when convenient. The partner who is present physically but absent emotionally. The subtle ways fear of vulnerability has kept you isolated. It is a sobering realization, and yet paradoxically there is relief in naming the truth. Once patterns are visible, they lose their power to unconsciously dictate your reactions. You realize the emptiness is not inevitable. It is shaped by dynamics that can be understood, addressed, and transformed. Story. Elena's moment of clarity. Elena had endured years of emotional distance from her partner. She longed for intimacy, but every attempt to communicate her needs was met with indifference. One evening, after yet another quiet dinner, she sat alone on the balcony, staring at the city lights. In the stillness, a thought struck her. I have been waiting for someone else to validate my worth, but I already am worthy. For the first time, she recognized the patterns, not only her partner's absence, but her own self-silencing, her own tendency to over-accommodate. The revelation was at once painful and liberating. This is the awakening, understanding that change begins internally before it can ripple outward. Metaphor. The fog. Lifting awakening is like the lifting of a dense morning fog. For months, maybe years, visibility was limited. Every step was tentative, every gesture uncertain. The outlines of connection blurred into shadow. Then slowly, the fog begins to shift. Shapes emerge, paths become clear. Obstacles are visible, yes, but so are opportunities. Awareness transforms uncertainty into possibility. What once felt arbitrary, the repeated disappointments, the hollow conversations, now reveals a structure, a pattern, a logic that can be navigated. Reclaiming self-worth. Central to this awakening is reclaiming self-worth. You realize that validation is not a gift to be earned. It is a birthright of the human heart. You deserve attention, care, and presence, not because you prove your value, but because you are valuable. Reclaiming self-worth involves noticing when you compromise your needs to appease others, when you minimize your emotions to avoid conflict, when you accept crumbs of connection rather than asking for full nourishment. It is the moment when you stand in the quiet, breathe deeply, and affirm, I am enough. I deserve genuine connection. I will not settle for absence masked as presence. Story. Marcus learns to set boundaries. Marcus had long tolerated superficial friendships and transactional relationships. He feared conflict, rejection, and being seen as difficult. After years of emotional exhaustion, he began noticing the patterns. He realized that some friends only engaged when it benefited them, and others dismissed his attempts at vulnerability. With careful reflection, Marcus began to set boundaries. He politely declined obligations that drained him, voiced his needs clearly, and limited interactions that perpetuated emptiness. At first, there was tension and even moments of doubt, but gradually he felt lighter. His heart, previously hollowed by repeated disappointments, began to sense space for genuine connection. Understanding the value of presence. Awakening also teaches a subtle but profound lesson. Presence matters more than grand gestures. It is not the expensive dinner, the dramatic confession, or the curated social media acknowledgement that nourishes the heart. It is the quiet attention, the listening without distraction, the simple act of showing up emotionally. When you begin to seek presence over performance, both in yourself and in others, you naturally gravitate toward relationships that are real, intimate, and sustaining. Metaphor. The mirror of reflection. Imagine standing before a mirror that shows not your physical appearance, but the state of your heart. In the past, the reflection may have seemed fragmented, parts of longing here, shadows of disappointment there. But as awakening occurs, clarity emerges. You see the patterns clearly, where you've given too much, where you've withheld, where fear dictated choices. The mirror does not judge. It simply reflects the truth, offering insight and the possibility of deliberate action. The courage to step forward awakening is not passive. Recognition alone does not heal. Courage is required. The courage to confront painful truths, to acknowledge where patterns have shaped your experience, and to take deliberate steps toward authenticity. This may mean voicing needs that have long been silenced, ending relationships that perpetuate emptiness, accepting that some people cannot meet you, no matter how much you hope, allowing yourself to be fully present even when risk of disappointment exists. Courage transforms awareness into action. It converts clarity into realignment. Story. Sophia chooses authenticity. Sophia, after repeated heartbreaks and superficial encounters, decided to change her approach. She stopped chasing validation and began communicating her true feelings openly. At first, some relationships faltered, others deepened. She discovered that authenticity is magnetic. Those who are meant to walk alongside you are drawn to the real you, not the version molded by fear and expectation. Through courage, Sophia moved from the hollow patterns of the past into relationships that fed rather than drained her heart. Recognizing superficial patterns. Critical aspect of this awakening is learning to discern superficiality. Not every social interaction is meaningful, and not every presence is nourishing. Early in the awakening, it can be tempting to assume every connection will fill the void. Discernment allows you to notice who consistently shows up emotionally, not just physically, who engages with empathy rather than obligation, which relationships offer mutuality, vulnerability, and genuine attention. Discernment is not cynicism, it is clarity. It is a protective, empowering lens that prevents old patterns from reasserting themselves. Metaphor. The compass of the heart awakening is a compass, guiding the heart toward what truly matters. Past patterns, emotional starvation, and repeated disappointments become markers on the map. The compass points toward authenticity, presence, and aligned values. With each step, guided by this internal compass, you move away from hollow interactions and toward connection that nourishes, sustains, and reflects your worth. Integration of reflection and action. This turning point is a delicate balance. Reflection must be paired with intentional action. Awareness without action leaves you paralyzed. Observing patterns without changing them. Action without awareness risks repeating old mistakes, mistaking busyness for transformation. The awakened heart observes, discerns, and then moves deliberately, choosing relationships and behaviors that reinforce wholeness rather than perpetuating emptiness. Story: Liam and Hannah reconnect. Returning to Liam and Hannah after years of quiet distance, the awakening begins when they both recognize their patterns. Hannah notices her habit of withdrawing to avoid confrontation. Liam notices his reliance on digital distractions rather than listening. They begin small. 10 minutes of uninterrupted conversation each night. Genuine check-ins and acknowledgement of unspoken feelings. It is not perfect. There are missteps, frustration, and lingering habits. But awakening has opened the door. For the first time in years, presence begins to outweigh absence. Authenticity begins to replace habit, and connection begins to feel alive again. The subtle tension of change. Awakening is both hopeful and tense. Hope emerges because clarity allows choice, and choice opens possibility. Tension arises because old patterns resist change. Fear of vulnerability lingers. Uncertainty remains. This tension is natural. It signals growth. It is the liminal space between the hollow past and the authentic future. Sitting in that tension, leaning into it and moving deliberately, despite it, is part of the journey. Metaphor: dawn after long night. Awakening is like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. Shadows do not vanish instantly. The chill of emptiness lingers. But the light introduces perspective. Obstacles are illuminated, paths are revealed, and warmth begins to seep into previously cold corners of the heart. You are not suddenly healed. You are not suddenly free of disappointment. But you are no longer trapped in patterns that hollow the soul. You are awake, aware, and beginning to choose differently. Closing reflection. The turning point is the moment when the heart stops drifting in hollow cycles and begins to navigate intentionally. It is a moment of clarity, recognition, and courage. You see the superficial patterns, reclaim your worth, and begin to prioritize authentic connection. This is not an endpoint. It is the hinge, the pivot where despair can give way to possibility, where loneliness can give way to presence, and where repeated disappointment can transform into conscious relational growth. There is a quiet power in rebuilding. After recognizing patterns and awakening to what truly matters, the heart often hesitates, wounded, wary, and unsure where to begin. Yet healing is not a sudden leap. It is a careful, deliberate practice of nurturing, boundary setting, and gentle reconstruction. It is where awareness meets action, where courage transforms into tangible change. This is the work of rebuilding emotional depth, learning to communicate, protect, and nourish your heart without closing it off entirely. Recognizing the need for healing, the first step in rebuilding is acknowledging that healing is necessary. Emotional emptiness leaves traces, the subtle tension of always giving more than you receive, the quiet self-doubt that whispers when a loved one withdraws, the creeping fear of being seen, yet simultaneously ignored. These traces are not signs of weakness, they are signals. They call you to pause, to reflect, and to care for the inner landscape that has been weathered by absence, superficiality, and past patterns. Healing begins when we stop blaming ourselves for being human and start attending to our emotional needs as deliberately as we would tend a fragile garden. Story: Maya learns to listen to her Selfia. Had spent years accommodating everyone, partners, friends, family, often at the cost of her own feelings. After her awakening, she realized she had neglected her own emotional landscape. So she began journaling, reflecting on her responses, and noticing which interactions left her depleted. Through this practice, she discovered her own emotional rhythms, when she felt open, when she needed solitude, and when she longed for authentic connection. Listening to herself became the first act of rebuilding. She began to honor her own needs before expecting others to do so. The role of boundaries are not walls. They are the frame of a healthy emotional structure. They define where your responsibility ends and another's begins, where generosity begins and self-sacrifice stops, and where presence can flourish without overextension. Consider boundaries as a protective garden fence. It doesn't prevent growth. It ensures that what grows inside is nourished and safe. Without boundaries, emotional depth cannot thrive. Overexposure leads to depletion. Under-assertion leads to resentment. With boundaries, you can engage fully without losing yourself. Practical guidance: establishing boundaries, identify emotional limits. Reflect on situations that leave you drained or resentful. Notice recurring patterns. Communicate clearly. Express your limits with calm clarity, without anger or apology. Honor your own needs. Treat your boundaries as non-negotiable. Self-respect is the foundation of authentic connection. Observe reactions. Healthy relationships. Respect your boundaries. Patterns of violation reveal areas to reconsider. Through consistent practice, boundaries transform your interactions from draining cycles into spaces of genuine exchange. Story: Daniel reclaims. His voice: Daniel often found himself saying yes to requests he did not want to fulfill, fearing conflict or rejection. After awakening, he practiced asserting his needs, declining commitments politely, expressing his emotional limits, and requesting space when necessary. At first, he worried he would upset others. Surprisingly, some relationships strengthened, drawn to the honesty and clarity he offered. Others faded, revealing their true nature. Through this process, Daniel began to reclaim emotional energy he hadn't realized he'd surrendered. Depth began to grow where previously there was only exhaustion. Rebuilding emotional intelligence. Emotional depth is not only about protecting yourself, it is about cultivating insight. Emotional intelligence involves recognizing your feelings and their origins, understanding how your emotions affect others, empathizing without losing yourself, navigating conflict with awareness rather than reaction. Developing emotional intelligence allows you to engage meaningfully without being hollowed out by patterns of past pain. It is the art of being fully present without fear, defensiveness, or resignation. Story: Lila learns to respond, not react. Lila often found herself triggered by the absence or detachment of others. Her heart would contract, and she would withdraw or lash out. Through reflection and mindful practice, she learned to pause. She recognized when her reactions were fueled by old wounds and when they were appropriate responses to present circumstances. By responding instead of reacting, Lila found that interactions became richer and more authentic. Emotional depth was no longer a fragile state. It became a skill cultivated through patience and self-awareness. The importance of self-compassion healing requires kindness toward yourself. Many carry guilt for perceived failures in relationships, for giving too much, or for setting limits. Self-compassion involves acknowledging your imperfections without judgment, understanding that emotional missteps are part of being human, and offering yourself the same care you give others. Through self-compassion, emotional depth is reinforced. The heart learns to protect, nurture, and engage without fear or shame. Practical guidance: daily healing practices, mindful reflection. Spend 10-15 minutes observing your emotional state without judgment. Journaling: capture feelings, patterns, and insights. Writing clarifies what is often muddled in thought. Meditation and breathwork calm the mind to allow clarity and insight to surface. Intentional connection. Seek interactions that are mutually nourishing, with presence, honesty, and empathy. Regular check-ins. Reassess boundaries and needs to maintain emotional integrity. These practices nurture the soil in which emotional depth can grow. Story: the rebuild. Friendship. After practicing reflection and boundary setting, Marcus reconnected with old friends, but differently. Instead of accommodating endlessly, he engaged with clarity, speaking openly about his needs and listening fully to theirs. The dynamic transformed. Conversations became richer, laughter returned, and support was mutual rather than one-sided. Emotional depth was no longer theoretical. It became tangible, lived, and sustaining. Metaphor: the deepening well. Imagine emotional depth as a well. In the past, the well was shallow, and every disappointment drew water that quickly ran dry. With conscious effort, boundaries, and self-awareness, the well deepens. Now interactions draw from a source that replenishes, sustains, and nurtures. You can give without fear of depletion, receive without guilt, and connect without losing yourself. Nurturing authentic relationships. Healing and rebuilding emotional depth is inseparable from cultivating authentic connection. Authenticity requires vulnerability paired with discernment, sharing openly, yet recognizing who can truly hold your heart. It is a balance between openness and protection, engagement and reflection. The deeper your emotional integrity, the more capable you become of forming bonds that are mutually fulfilling and resilient. Story: Sophia and the Circle of Trust. Sophia, after years of superficial dating and transactional friendships, began to invest in relationships that honored her awakening. She shared her experiences honestly, sought partners and friends who respected her boundaries, and engaged with empathy rather than expectation. Slowly, her circle transformed. Depth replaced surface-level interaction. Trust and intimacy grew where once there was only emptiness. Reflection: patience as part of healing. Emotional depth is not instantaneous. It grows gradually, like roots expanding beneath soil, unseen but essential. Patience allows for mistakes, missteps, and recalibration. It nurtures resilience and prevents discouragement when others fall short of expectation. Healing is a long-term commitment to self-care, presence, and conscious engagement, a practice that slowly reorients the heart toward richness rather than hollowness. Metaphor: the garden of the heart. Consider the heart as a garden. Boundaries are the fence. Reflection and emotional intelligence are the nutrients. Self-compassion is the sunlight. Authentic connection is the water. Without care, weeds of fear, resentment, and old patterns overtake the garden. With conscious attention, the soil becomes fertile. Flowers bloom, fruit ripens. A well-tended heart grows strong, resilient, and capable of nourishing both itself and others. Closing arc healing and rebuilding emotional depth is the bridge from awakening to wisdom. It transforms insight into action, reflection into presence, and vulnerability into a source of strength rather than fear. You learn to communicate clearly, honor your needs, and engage with others authentically. You cultivate emotional intelligence and self-compassion, creating a heart that is both resilient and open. The depth you build now becomes the foundation for deeper relational understanding and spiritual insight. In the quiet of your heart, after cycles of disappointment, longing, and reflection, a subtle question emerges. How can love survive in a world so distracted, so fragmented, so fleeting? The answer begins not with another person, but with timeless wisdom. Truths that bridge psychology and faith, guiding the heart toward clarity, patience, and authentic presence. Modern love may challenge us, but the principles that sustain deep connection have not changed. They reside in the soul, the mind, and the spirit. And when we awaken to them, even emptiness can transform into profound understanding. Recognizing the inner source of connection, true relational depth begins within. Psychological research affirms that the quality of our relationships is intimately tied to the health of our internal. Emotional intelligence allows us to empathize without losing ourselves. Self-compassion frees us from patterns of self-blame and resentment. Awareness of attachment tendencies helps us respond consciously rather than reactively. In faith, this inner work is mirrored in the cultivation of the soul. Patience, presence, and love that transcends circumstance. Just as rivers flow from a source, so does relational vitality flow from the heart that has been nurtured, healed, and illuminated by wisdom. Story. Lucas learns. Patience. Lucas had grown weary of fleeting connections. Every date, every new friendship seemed to evaporate into disappointment. A mentor guided him to a simple practice. Before seeking connection externally, nurture the internal landscape. He meditated daily, reflected on past patterns, and prayed for clarity and patience. Over time, Lucas noticed a shift. His responses became calmer, his expectations tempered with insight, and his heart capable of deeper appreciation when genuine connection finally arrived. Wisdom, both spiritual and psychological, reshaped not only his perspective, but his experience of love itself. Metaphor. The river and the source. Imagine a river stretching across vast landscapes. Its depth, flow, and clarity depend on the source from which it emerges. Modern distractions, superficial engagements, and emotional noise can make the river appear shallow or turbulent. Yet beneath the surface, the source continues to flow. The source is your cultivated heart, aware, patient, and guided by wisdom. When you nurture it, the river of love and connection runs deep, sustaining both yourself and those you meet. The role of patience is the bridge between desire and fulfillment. In modern love, we are conditioned to expect instant gratification, immediate messages, visible affection, rapid validation. Yet meaningful relationships are built over time. Patience allows us to resist the temptation to overinvest in superficial bonds. Observe patterns without rushing to judgment. Respond to others with clarity rather than reaction. Foster growth in ourselves and in the relationship. Psychologically, patience strengthens resilience. Spiritually, it cultivates trust in a larger unfolding of life's timing. Story. Hannah embraces. Timing. Hannah had felt constant anxiety in relationships. Every silence felt like rejection. Every delay in communication, a failure. Through spiritual reflection, she began practicing patience. She reminded herself that connection cannot be forced, that hearts and minds grow at their own pace. This shift transformed her experience. She began to notice subtleties, the small gestures, the quiet attentiveness, the moments that mattered but had previously been overshadowed by impatience. In patience, she discovered that love is less about speed and more about presence. Understanding emotional cycles psychologically, relationships operate in cycles of intimacy, conflict, reconciliation, and growth. Recognizing these cycles allows us to navigate challenges without despair. Conflict is natural. It does not signal failure. Distance may reflect personal struggles rather than relational. Deficiency repeated patterns are invitations to awareness rather than condemnation. By viewing relational dynamics through this lens, we step into wisdom. We understand the why behind experiences, and we engage with intentionality rather than reaction. Story. Daniel and Grace. Learn reconciliation. Daniel and Grace often found themselves caught in repeated misunderstandings. Each argument felt catastrophic, leaving both resentful and anxious. By studying emotional cycles and reflecting on their own triggers, they began to approach conflict differently. Instead of reacting impulsively, they paused, expressed their needs calmly, and listened actively. Their relationship did not become perfect overnight, but it grew richer, deeper, and more resilient. Psychological awareness became a tool for cultivating relational wisdom. Spiritual awareness, love as presence faith, teaches that love is more than emotion. It is presence, attention, and intention. To love authentically is to see the other fully, without projection, offer care without expectation of reciprocation, accept imperfection, including your own. Ground actions in compassion rather than fear or desire for control. Spiritual awareness transforms the heart from being reactive to being a conscious participant in love, aligning emotional depth with higher purpose. Metaphor. The garden of intention. Imagine relationships as gardens. Some gardens are neglected, overrun with weeds of miscommunication, unhealed wounds, and unrealistic expectation. Others are intentionally tended, with understanding, patience, and presence as the soil, water, and sunlight. The wise gardener does not force growth but nurtures conditions where connection can flourish. Emotional intelligence is the hands that prune, faith is the sunlight that warms, and patience is the steady rhythm of care. Integration of psychology and faith wisdom emerges when psychological insight meets spiritual guidance. Awareness of attachment styles, emotional triggers, and behavioral patterns informs conscious choices. Spiritual principles of patience, compassion, and surrender provide a framework for meaning and resilience. Together, they allow the heart to engage fully, without being hollowed out by fear, impatience, or unexamined expectation. This integrated approach elevates modern love beyond superficial connection into a depth that nurtures the self and others simultaneously. Story. Sophia and her circle. Sophia, after years of transient friendships, began integrating these principles. She reflected on her own needs and attachment tendencies. She exercised patience with herself and others. She cultivated discernment, recognizing who could genuinely hold her heart. And she approached relationships with intentional love, rooted in presence and authenticity. Her social circle changed, not in quantity but in quality. Each connection carried more depth, more resilience, and more mutual care. Wisdom had transformed the landscape of her love life. Metaphor. The lighthouse. Think of spiritual and psychological wisdom as a lighthouse. Storms of misunderstanding, absence, or distraction may rage around the shores of modern life. Waves of superficiality and impatience crash relentlessly. Yet the lighthouse stands, its beam illuminating the way, presence, patience, and authenticity. Those who navigate by this light find safe passage through relational turbulence, guided by clarity, integrity, and insight. Practical application. Daily wisdom practices reflect on patterns. Observe interactions without judgment, noting recurring dynamics and personal triggers. Practice patience. Give relationships time to evolve. Resist the urge to control outcomes. Cultivate presence. Engage fully in conversation. Listening deeply without distraction. Integrate faith and mindfulness. Allow spiritual insight to inform emotional choices, aligning heart and action. Prioritize mutual growth. Focus on connections that foster development, empathy, and resilience for both parties. Through daily practice, wisdom becomes embodied, not an abstract concept, but a lived experience shaping the heart's engagement with others. Story. Lucas and the power of perspective. Lucas, after years of frustrated pursuit of connection, embraced a new approach. By reflecting on psychological patterns, Practicing patience and grounding himself spiritually, he navigated relationships differently. He noticed when expectations were unrealistic, responded to distance without fear, and offered presence without desperation. The result was subtle but profound. Interactions became richer, misunderstandings less frequent, and moments of genuine connection more meaningful. Perspective, born of wisdom, reshaped not only his relationships but his experience of himself within them. Reflection. Love as a skill. Wisdom teaches that love is a skill cultivated over time, not a spontaneous, effortless occurrence. It requires self-awareness, insight and reflection. It requires patience, presence and integrity. It requires spiritual grounding, acknowledging that love is both human and transcendent. Approaching love as a skill transforms disappointment into opportunity, frustration into reflection, and emptiness into fertile ground for growth. Metaphor. The flame that does not flicker. Consider love, guided by wisdom, as a flame that burns steadily. Even in the wind, emotional storms may sway it, but its roots are deep. Superficial distractions may brush against it, but they cannot extinguish it. True wisdom ensures that love is resilient, steady, and capable of illuminating even the darkest corners of the heart. This flame is not dependent on perfect circumstances. It thrives because it is nurtured within, informed by insight and sustained by conscious practice. There is a subtle stillness that comes after insight, a quiet pause where the heart begins to exhale, where the mind stops racing, and the soul remembers itself. It is in this space, between reflection and presence, that fulfillment begins to stir. Not fulfillment built on external approval or constant engagement, but the kind that comes from knowing yourself, honoring your own heart, and approaching others from a place of grounded awareness. After awakening and integrating wisdom, we step into the gentle work of reconnecting with ourselves, with those who matter, and with the quiet rhythms of life itself. Reclaiming yourself, the first act of finding fulfillment is turning inward. After cycles of longing, disappointment, and reflection, you may feel depleted, unsure, or fractured. Begin with simple awareness. Notice your emotional landscape without judgment.
Ask yourself, which parts of me have I neglected?
Where does my joy still reside, untouched by expectation? How can I cultivate presence in my own life before seeking it elsewhere?
Reclaiming yourself is not selfish, it is foundational.
You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot engage meaningfully with others until you are whole enough to recognize your own needs and rhythms. Story. Emma finds. Her center. Emma had spent years measuring her worth by others' attention, approval and affection. Each withdrawal, each silence left her doubting herself. Through reflective practices, journaling, mindfulness, and quiet contemplation, she began noticing her own presence, her own small joys, and the patterns that drained her energy. Over time, Emma discovered that fulfillment was not something to chase externally. It lived within her awareness, her values, and her capacity for self-compassion. Reconnection with herself became the first step toward relational richness, cultivating meaningful bonds. With self-awareness as a foundation, we can approach others with clarity and intentionality. Meaningful connections are not abundant. They are cultivated with care, patience, and mutual respect. Choose relationships that honor your boundaries. Engage fully in conversation, listening deeply rather than reacting. Celebrate presence over perfection, attention over quantity, and sincerity over superficiality. Psychologically, this approach prevents exhaustion and resentment. Spiritually, it aligns your interactions with authentic care rather than attachment or expectation. Story. Michael learns. depth in friendship. Michael had many acquaintances but few friends who truly knew him. He often found himself drained by shallow conversations or one-sided support. After reflection, he began prioritizing depth over number. He reached out selectively, asked meaningful questions, and shared vulnerabilities cautiously but authentically. The shift was subtle at first, deeper conversations,
Laughter that resonated, and the sense that someone truly saw him.
Emotional fulfillment does not come from everyone. It comes from the few who engage with authenticity. Presence over expectation. Fulfillment emerges not when others meet our desires, but when we embrace presence, being fully engaged in the moment, noticing the beauty in connection, and letting go of rigid expectations. Observe the small gestures, a smile, a glance, a thoughtful word. Appreciate connection without demanding. Reciprocity, engage with others without attaching your self-worth to outcomes. This shift transforms relationships from a source of anxiety to a source of quiet nourishment. Story. Sophia practices presence. Sophia,
Often worried about whether her friends truly cared.
reading into every text delay and missed call, she realized that her expectations were causing her more suffering than reality itself. Through mindfulness and intentional presence, Sophia began noticing the little ways her friends expressed care, a check-in message, an invitation, or shared laughter. She let go of constant evaluation, and in doing so discovered fulfillment that had been hidden in plain sight. Reflection. Joy in solitude. Solitude is not loneliness, it is a restorative state where reflection, creativity, and peace can flourish. Spend time alone without distraction. Engage in activities that nurture your spirit. Writing, walking, meditation, or quiet observation. Notice how your thoughts settle and your heart aligns with your own values. Psychology confirms that regular periods of solitude strengthen resilience, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. Spiritually, solitude allows connection with your inner truth and, for those who believe, a deeper communion with the divine. Metaphor: the tree and its roots. Consider a tree whose branches stretch toward others. Friends, lovers, colleagues. Its strength comes not from the reach of its branches, but from the depth and nourishment of its roots. Roots symbolize self-awareness, reflection, and groundedness. Branches symbolize connection, engagement, and contribution. Without roots, branches wither even under the sun of opportunity. With roots, the tree can weather storms, bear fruit, and create shade for others. Fulfillment is cultivated in the roots as much as in the branches. Reconnecting through service, meaningful connection is amplified by acts of care that were authentic rather than performative. Listen without agenda, offer help without expectation, celebrate others' successes without envy or comparison. This is not about martyrdom. It is about presence, empathy, and intentional engagement. Psychology calls this pro-social behavior. Spirituality calls it love in action. Both create a resonance that deepens connection and nourishes your own heart. Story. Amir discovers mutual care. Amir often felt disconnected in his community, giving attention without receiving acknowledgement. He decided to shift his perspective. Instead of tallying what he received, he focused on the joy of genuine care. He listened, offered guidance, and participated in shared activities with mindful attention. Over time, relationships naturally deepened, and a sense of fulfillment emerged, not from recognition, but from authentic presence, integrating reflection, wisdom, and presence. Modern love is complicated, but reflection and wisdom simplify it. Reflection allows you to notice patterns, recognize triggers, and understand desires. Wisdom guides engagement, teaching patience, discernment, and the importance of authenticity. Presence transforms interaction into meaningful exchange, rooted in care and attention rather than expectation. The combination of these practices turns relational landscapes from chaotic and draining into rich, resonant and fulfilling spaces. Story: Lila cultivates emotional richness. Lila, after years of superficial relationships, committed to integrating reflection, wisdom, and presence in her life. She reflected daily, noting her own patterns and emotional needs. She applied wisdom in setting boundaries and discerning meaningful interactions. She approached each conversation with presence, listening and responding thoughtfully. Gradually, her experience of connection shifted. Relationships became sources of growth, comfort, and joy, rather than anxiety or emptiness. Fulfillment emerged not as a goal to chase, but as a natural byproduct of intentional living. Metaphor: the calm lake. Imagine a lake at dawn. The water is still, reflecting the sky and trees with clarity. Ripples disturb it only briefly before settling back into calm. Your heart can be like this lake. After turbulence, disappointment, longing, emptiness, you have cultivated reflection, wisdom, and presence. The water of your being is calm, allowing authentic connection to mirror your depth. Fulfillment is found in this stillness, in the clarity that comes from being whole enough to engage without anxiety, attachment, or distraction. Practical practices for ongoing fulfillment: daily reflection. Spend time noticing emotions, responses, and relational patterns. Intentional presence. Fully engage with interactions, large or small. Selective connection. Prioritize relationships that foster growth and mutual respect. Gratitude. Practice. Appreciate subtle gestures, moments of joy, and the presence of others. Solitude as renewal. Regularly retreat into quiet reflection to reconnect with yourself. These practices create a rhythm of fulfillment, turning insight and wisdom into lived experience. Closing arc: reflection and connection are not endpoints, they are ongoing. Practices: fulfillment is not measured by quantity but by the depth of engagement. Emotional richness arises from awareness, presence, and deliberate action. Joy emerges not from others' validation, but from reconnecting with your own heart and engaging authentically with the world. Take a deep breath and feel the weight of everything you've experienced, the disappointments, the silences, the unmet expectations, the moments when connection seemed just out of reach. Now, hold your hand over your heart. Feel it beat. Feel its persistence, its quiet strength, its endless capacity to love even when love has seemed scarce. This is where your journey rests for a moment, not in achievement, not in perfection, but in recognition. You are here. Your heart is open and it is ready again. Affirmation of worth. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not flawed because others could not see you, hear you, or meet you where you needed them. Your worth is inherent, unshakable, and eternal. Even when connection faltered, even when the world felt cold, your capacity for love never left you. Let this truth settle in. You are whole.
You are enough.
You are capable of deep, meaningful love. Healing your heart. Your heart has been tested by absence, by superficiality, by cycles of unmet expectation. And yet, these experiences have not destroyed you, they have prepared you to recognize the difference between connection that nourishes and connection that drains. Approach relationships with presence rather than projection. Set boundaries without fear, and give without losing yourself. The wounds you carry are not scars of failure, they are maps of resilience, proof that you have survived, reflected, and grown. Story: the candle that continues to shine. Imagine a candle that has burned through storms of wind and shadow. Each gust threatens to extinguish it, yet it flickers, bends, and continues to shine. Your heart is like that candle.
Every disappointment, every silence, every moment of longing has been a wind.
And yet here you are, the flame still alive, still capable of illuminating, still capable of warmth. No matter how dim the world around you feels, your heart has the power to light again. The gift of presence, love, is not a performance nor a transaction. It is presence, being fully attentive to another without losing yourself. Listening without judgment, speaking without defensiveness, offering care and kindness without expecting repayment. This presence is sacred. It transforms ordinary interactions into moments of grace. It allows hearts, yours and others, and to be fully seen and fully felt. Spiritual grounding for those who believe. Remember, your heart is held by something greater than circumstance, the quiet moments, the patience you cultivate, the lessons learned from reflection. They are all part of a larger tapestry of life, woven with intention, grace, and care. Even in silence, even in absence, love exists. It waits patiently, quietly, ready to flow again when you are ready to receive and give it authentically. Story: reawakening connection. Consider two friends who had drifted apart. Years of distance, misunderstandings, and missed opportunities had left space between them. Yet one day, a simple gesture, a text, a shared memory, a small act of care became a bridge. They reconnected cautiously at first, and then with genuine joy. The lesson is clear: love does not vanish. It may pause, it may hide, but the heart that remains open always finds a way to be full again. Embracing joy and gratitude. Let your heart cultivate joy, not dependent on perfection, not tied to outcomes, but rooted in simple presence. The laughter shared with a friend, the warmth of a hug, the quiet pride in personal growth, the calm of a peaceful moment alone. Gratitude nurtures your heart and keeps it fertile for connection. The more you notice and appreciate, the more space there is for authentic love to enter. Metaphor: the ocean. Within, think of your heart as an ocean, vast, deep, and resilient. Waves may crash, storms may rage, and tides may shift, yet beneath the surface the water remains. Deep currents of compassion, empathy, and love continue to flow. They carry the power to reach shores both known and unknown, connecting you to others with authenticity and depth. Your heart is that ocean, capable, enduring, and infinitely giving. Blessing for the heart. May your heart always remember: that being hurt does not mean you are unlovable. That being ignored does not erase your light. That patience and presence cultivate the richest,
Most sustaining love. May you find relationships that honor your boundaries, uplift your spirit,
and nourish your soul. May you approach every connection with awareness, empathy, and courage. May the love you give and receive be gentle, honest, and enduring. Closing, reflection. Modern love may feel empty at times. It may feel fleeting, transactional, or superficial, but your heart is not defined by the failures or distractions of the world. Your capacity to love, to care deeply, to be fully present, this remains intact, eternal, and profound. Even after disappointment, your heart can beat openly, trust again, and embrace connection with wisdom and joy. So, as you rest tonight, know this: you are seen, you are valued, and you are capable of love that is deep, sustaining, and transformative. Modern love may feel empty, but your heart still has the power to be full. This is not the end. It is the beginning of hearts that can love deeply again.